Hello there, and welcome to a special bonus episode of Magic by Design. We are taking a well-earned break this week after 59 consecutive weeks of watching and reviewing Disney animated movies, but we couldn't leave you without the soothing sound of our voices for even 1 week, so we thought we'd cap off our Disney discussions for now with our best and worst of the studio's theatrical efforts to date. We pre-recorded this episode at the same time as the Raya and the Last Dragon episode last week, so we are currently talking to you from the distant past. Ooh.
2 whole weeks ago. It's like a Meet the Robinsons situation, which isn't on either of my lists.
Yes, mine neither. You heard his voice there. I am joined, as always, by my co-host / brother, Garrett. Gar, how are you since we just recorded our last podcast?
Even on bonus episodes, I butt in before I'm introduced.
Yeah, you gotta keep up the tradition, Gar. So, we're going to give the top 10 best in each of our opinions, and top 5 worst, because we don't like to dwell on the negative.
I like the way you say that, even though I've literally spent hours of this podcast dwelling on the negatives of Aristocats. We don't like to dwell on the negatives, we just bring them up on every episode.
It should be fun to compare and contrast. I'm just ignoring that now, guys, because I'm trying to focus on the positive, Gar.
All right.
I thought we'd get the bad out of the way first.
I think we'll go through the bad faster as well.
Yeah, so, Gar, princesses go first.
Okay, so my number 5 worst film in the history of the Disney Animated Studios is Dinosaur. Is it on your list?
Same.
Oh, it's as 5?
Yeah.
Oh, we're so in sync. As we mentioned when we go back and listen to it, Dinosaur, from a plot perspective, it's actually mostly fine. It just looks hideous. It's an awful looking, dreadful, terrible looking film that is just gross to look at.
Distractingly so.
It's just so horrible to put your eyeballs on for 90 minutes that I cannot in good faith say that even the good elements are worth digging into, because you will want to claw your eyeballs out because you see those terrible, formless CG dinosaurs with their dead eyes.
Yeah, I'm number 5 for Dinosaur too. And I think we agreed at the time, the endeavour was there. They were trying to do something new. They were getting to grips with the technology, but it's just so distractingly bad. Mm-hmm. And they tried to mix the 3D animation with the live action backgrounds, and then they stuck, there was, at one point, there's monkeys swinging on vines that weren't connected to anything.
No.
And they had an explosion that looked like something that you make in Photoshop.
Or like with the Power Rangers movie. You know, when the model is blowing up. Yeah. Looks like that.
Firm McGregor.
To be fair, Dinosaur is bad for interesting reasons, which is the reason it's not lower on this list.
Yeah, or higher. By being higher, you're lower. So.
Yes, because it does try to do interesting things, but just fails calamitously.
What do you got at number 4, Gar?
Fantasia 2000.
Interesting, I don't have that.
So, Fantasia 2000, by the way we're going to work this is if we have the same thing twice, we'll talk about it for whoever has it higher. Yeah. So, say if I have Fantasia 2000 at 4 and Ken has it at 2, we'll wait until we get to Ken's 2. But Ken doesn't have it at all. So, Fantasia 2000, I didn't particularly like Fantasia, but there are parts of Fantasia that are good. Then you get to Fantasia 2000, of which all of those segments are bad, except maybe that one where the man is working. That one's pretty good. And then the rest are terrible. And then you even get one that's just plucked out of the original Fantasia and dropped back in. Not even touched up, not even reanimated. It's just the same thing again, and that's unforgivable. And it's like, oh, it's the idea of the program. We put the favorites back in. It's like, nope, Fantasia, stop trying to make Fantasia happen. 4th worst movie in Disney Animated Studios history.
Number 4, Aristocats.
Oh, that's higher for me, would you believe, Ken?
Yeah, I feel like Aristocats has some merit, because I do like the kitten characters, I do like the music, there's not enough of it for me. There are some annoying things like the melting figures. Yeah, but I think the thing that jaded me about that film was Phil Harris was in a lot of these films at the time. Mm-hmm. So
playing himself.
Yeah.
If you go back to the episode we just recorded, but it's a talking point because I mentioned it, Awkwafina as well, same thing.
Yeah, so Phil Harris played Baloo amongst others, so it felt like we were getting the same character over and over again. I think we concluded that this film, while having some merit with the music, was derivative of other movies, had nothing new to offer, and the animation looked absolutely terrible. Yeah. And we've had this shortcut animation in other films where they used the heavy line technique of the photocopying and all that, but 101 Dalmatians looks good. So
yeah. It doesn't look like there's anybody melting. It's higher for me though, so Number 3, Ken?
Melody time.
Oh, you see, I avoided most of the package films, most being the operative word. Why do you hate Melody Time? I don't remember Melody Time. That's the thing.
That's one thing. I just went back, I think it's second last in the package run, and we were just so jaded by them at the time that maybe it coloured my thoughts, but there was nothing new. All the stuff felt cheap and, undercooked. And I didn't go into too much detail, but I looked at the blurb for the episode, and it's the most negative one that we've had. So, yeah.
My number 3 is Home on the Range.
Oh.
Did you not include it?
I did.
Oh, okay. So we'll talk about it when you get there. So 2 for me, 3 Cubby Heroes.
Yep. Absolute same.
The same with 2. It's just, again, it's not like there's 2 shorts at the start, which I'm pretty sure the penguin short is in that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is okay. And then it gets to the extended actual 3 Cubby Hero sequence, which is just like 40 minutes of them dancing to the, it's like music and dancing, music and dancing, music and dancing. Unbearable. You will fall asleep. It's so boring. It's so boring.
And feels so long for a film that's like an hour or less.
Yeah, it's like that because it's that one sequence. It's the Donald Duck and the other 2 dopes, birds flying about the place, dancing for 40 minutes. Just, that's all they do. They just sing and they dance for 40 minutes. And the only interesting bit is maybe when they integrate live action with the dancing a little bit, and that's kind of neat. And the rest is awful when they're on the beach and Donald's being a sex pest.
But even then, the fact that this was developing technology. Well, they've actually used it quite a lot over the years. They made their fortune in the Atlas comedies, as you remember. But it just looks awkward. Like, it's made for short sequences at the time anyway. Because, like, you have this woman who doesn't know what she's doing. She's like, oh, there's someone next to you maybe. And she's trying to act, but it's awkward.
It's terrible.
And they cycled the animation as well, so you just see the same dance repeating over and over
They
again.
just loop it. My number 1 is Aristocats. Terrible, awful film. I've talked about it enough on the show.
I placed Home on the Range at number 1.
The DreamWorks. It's because it really is the low. It's the post-Renaissance low when they're just like, and we're doing DreamWorks. It's sad and cynical, and as we said on the show, it's not Disney.
It feels like they lost their way. They wanted to try and keep up with what was popular and what was making money, and that was never what Disney did. They always forged their own path, marched to the beat of their own drum, and as you said, even with Fantasia, even if it wasn't successful, at least they were trying to do something, and with that, they were just trying to follow the crowd, and it really bothered me.
Yeah, so for a quick recap purposes, my top 5 from worst to 5th worst: 1 Aristocats, 2 3 Cubby Heroes, 3 Home on the Range, 4 Fantasia 2000, and 5 Dinosaur.
And for me, 1 Home on the Range, 2 The 3 Caballeros, 3 Melody Time, 4 The Aristocats, and 5 Dinosaur. Honourable mentions to The Black Cauldron and both Fantasia films.
How dare you mention The Black Cauldron? It deserves to live in its mediocrity.
It does, and there is some good stuff in terms of the development of animation effects, and I did enjoy the interplay between the characters as well.
Yeah.
It was a fun ragtag bunch that comedy developed from their antics, whereas in Raya, like, I think they were playing for comedy, but it didn't come across.
We didn't mention it. I forgot to mention it, so it's funny, we just recorded it. It's now a week later that you will hear my updated take on Raya that I forgot to mention. That film's not funny.
No.
There are no good jokes in that movie.
I had a couple of chuckles.
Again,
Mild
Con
chuckles.
Baby. Con Baby's occasionally funny, and everything else, there's no good jokes.
Yeah.
Ugh, Raya. It should be in, like...
It's actually not on my list of top 5 worst, because I don't think it's that bad.
It's not that bad, no, but it's certainly in the bottom tier. So, top 10, Ken.
I found this list much more difficult than the top worst, partly because I have a strong affinity for some of these movies, even the ones I excluded. But also, the more spots there are, the harder it is to place one above another. But I'm going to start off with 10, The Great Mouse Detective.
Would you like to know what my number 10 is, Ken?
Yes, Gar.
It's The Great Mouse Detective.
Whoa.
Which I was like, it's one of my like left field picks. It's like, oh, you know what? I'm putting Great Mouse Detective top 10. Which clearly you had the same idea.
Exactly. And like, it's funny how synced we've become over watching these films that we kind of understand where the benchmark is. It's not quite up there in the top. You can't put it up the top of the list, but it deserves to be on there.
Because like, again, 10 is always the vanity pick in these things. It's the thing where you're like, all right, the 9 to 1 is like the really best of the best. 10 is like the interesting me pick that I'm going to pick. And through watching these films for this podcast, I would say, again, Great Mouse Detective is the most underrated Disney animated feature. It's so enjoyable. It's a fun detective tale. It has a great villain in Ratigan. It's a great Sherlock Holmes movie, and you should watch it. It's so good.
And it has some bops.
It does. It has one of the best villain songs.
There is one problematic song, but, you know.
It's Disney from before the year 2010. There's something problematic in all of them.
Number 9, Gar, I have Tangled.
Ooh, I didn't include Tangled, so go ahead. Talk to me about Tangled.
I struggled with this one because there's films that, for personal reasons, I like more. Mm-hmm. But I just can't get away from the fact that Tangled is Disney possibly firing in all cylinders.
Because it's one of the films where it's a formula film, but all of the formula elements are done well.
Yeah.
Like, it's a film with cute animal sidekicks, but Max is a really good cute animal sidekick.
It's got great comedy, it's got great songs. I like the relationship between Rapunzel and Flynn Rider. I like the way they grow throughout the film. The animation, it's gorgeous. I think, as you said, it's doing Disney by the numbers, but it's hitting on every front. So I had to include it in my list.
Yeah, so I didn't include it. My number 9, Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, yes. It's on my list also, Gar.
So we'll talk about it when we get to yours. So 8.
8 is Tarzan.
Which, not on mine.
Interesting. Again, I think we talked about it at the time. They were coming towards the end of the Disney Renaissance period, so you couldn't put it up there with the height of the Renaissance. But I can't get away from the songs. The songs are incredible.
Phil Collins. You can't beat Phil Collins.
I think the character development is pretty good. I like Clayton as a villain. He's more sinister than most because he feels like a real-life person. I think the animation is gorgeous, both in terms of the way they realised the jungle, but also in terms of how they started to combat human anatomy, which was an issue for them going all the way back to the start, as we know. And the way Tarzan moved through the trees, there's a lot of great stuff in there.
One of the better implementations of 3D and 2D movies as well.
Yes.
With those log sliding sequences.
Like tree surfing, I'd call those.
There you go. Log sliding is obviously an Olympic sport in the Winter Olympics. My number 8, Bambi.
Ooh, it's on my list too.
So we'll talk about it when you get to it. 7.
7 is Mulan.
Again, not on mine. We have very different lists here, Ken.
Yes. I think it's for the same reason. I think it shows Disney firing in all cylinders. Like songs, I think that the story is good. I think they tried their best to be faithful to the source material. I know people have issues with it, but the animation is great, especially the sequence on the mountain.
I'll Make a Man Out of You is top tier Disney.
Yeah.
It's a great song.
And I just feel like if you're talking about the sweet spot of the Renaissance between when they're hitting their height and when they're starting to decline, I think it's right in the middle there.
So my number 7 is Aladdin.
Oh, interesting. Aladdin did not make my list.
Oh, finally, I have a film I can talk about. We talked about it, like, I was thinking about it. This slot basically was one of the B-tier Renaissance films.
Yeah.
So for me, I'll reveal some films that aren't on my list. It was between Aladdin, Hercules, Little Mermaid, and Tarzan.
This is interesting for me because I love films like Aladdin and Hercules, and I always will. And while there's a lot to love about them, like Robin Williams, we talked about
which
that
is most of the reason it's at number 7.
I can recognise that they aren't Disney animation at its absolute best.
Yeah, so I felt like one of the films from that period deserved to be represented, and you chose 2 of them. You chose Mulan and you chose Tarzan. I went for Aladdin just because I think it has great songs, like top-notch songs. Plot-wise, it's pretty mediocre, but Jafar is one of those, like, great. I think we picked holes in him as, like, no, did we like Jafar? I don't even remember.
I think Jafar is a bit of a pantomime villain, but you like that because you accept that's what they're going for.
Yeah, great design, great performance, great music. The love story's alright, but, like, just the songs and the Robin Williams performance will linger in your memory for a very long time. So Aladdin at 7. 6.
I have Sleeping Beauty at 6.
Which was my 9. Yeah, I think it's the pinnacle of, like, pre-Renaissance. Not quite pinnacle, one of the pinnacles, along with Bambi for me, of the pre-Renaissance, of, like, this is children's entertainment as art, as opposed to children's entertainment as, lowest common denominator, bright colours make children clap.
We talked about this at the time. Every frame of this movie, if you freeze frame it, is a painting. Mm-hmm. It's gorgeous. I really enjoyed the fairy characters. There's some great comedy there. There's not much music. It's appropriate for the movie. And it's a very tightly plotted movie as well.
Yeah, it's so pretty. That's the thing about Sleeping Beauty, above all. Like, it is art. It's animation as art in the purest, raw form. It's so nice to look at. It's like the Bippity Boppity ladies.
Yeah.
What are their names? Fairy Godmothers.
Yes.
There we go. They're actually very funny, and their interaction between each other is very enjoyable. And yeah, Sleeping Beauty is a great movie. Rather fittingly, Ken, number 6 is Big Hero 6.
Oh, it's not on my list. Go ahead.
Which is one of the better films. Like, I really... It's Baymax. I love Baymax. He's one of my favourite characters in Disney animated history, and he carries that entire movie, and that central relationship between Hero and Baymax is just so charming and so heartwarming, and the way they built San Francisco. Literally, I've clearly picked Big Hero 6 to finally say that properly on the podcast. I really, 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 really like all of the elements of that movie. A lot.
I agree with all those things, but I just don't think of it in the top conversation.
It just doesn't have the songs, doesn't it, Ken? Ken needs the music. He needs the tunes.
I need Baymax singing an I Want a Song.
Oh, God.
Number 5, I have Bambi.
That was my number 8. Very important film. Again, similar to Sleeping Beauty, exceptionally pretty.
Yes.
And some of the plotting eventually, it falls into the fall in love in one glance in the second half of it.
But it's also about something. It's the first Disney movie to be about something with the environmental message as well.
Which is far before its time as well.
Yeah.
Bambi's mom dying is one of the most important. And she doesn't come back to life, goddammit.
Yeah. She stays dead, God forbid.
Yeah, she's not freaking revived. Ugh.
As you say, again, any frame in this movie is beautiful. And the reason it's successful and it's not dated is they evoke the feeling of the forest rather than trying to replicate it. And yeah, again, it has some of the by the numbers tropes, but they apply them successfully.
Yep. And in fairness, this film was released before they became tropes. This film created the tropes, so they're not tropes. Number 5 for me, Ken, and it's kind of cheating. It's a tie.
Okay.
Between The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and Winnie the Pooh.
Okay, I'll give you that since they're connected.
Yeah, both of them. Like, they're both very charming. They're both so well animated. They're so lovely to look at because of that 2D animation and the way they use the book effects to create the story and propel the narrative and make the story and the literal words on the page and the narrator actually influence the story in ways that are so smart and so funny and just so charming. This film warms your heart. So it's both of them because I think both are very similar.
The second one is a continuation of the first one, I think, really.
So really you should watch them back to back because they're actually not that long, both of them, which might be the criticism, but we addressed it at the time. I want an hour 15, I think it's actually an hour, of really good stuff over freaking Raya with their an hour 40 of mediocre stuff.
At number 4, Gar, I have Lilo and Stitch.
Oh, it's higher for me, Ken, so we'll talk about it when I get to it. Number 4 for me, Zootopia.
Ah, yes, also on my list, Gar.
So that means we move on to 3.
Which is, for me, Zootopia, Zootropolis.
Which is one of the bigger pleasant surprises for me when I watched these movies because I missed it. I hadn't seen it. And I like a good chunk of the modern Disney animated movies. I think Tangled is great. I think Frozen is great. I think Big Hero 6 is great. But then Zootopia just came along and just blew me away by being so funny, by being so intricately animated and creating, no movie in any of these worlds creates a more intricately detailed world than Zootopia does. Every frame of it, there's a little detail in there that you're like, oh, that's a good little gag. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that's so clever for a world built around animals. And you'll see that over and over again. Just small things, like the bunny population just going up and up and up and up at an astronomical rate. Those small little touches and small little attention to detail elements that create this full, complete, dynamic world that they tell a great story in with great memorable characters. Top-notch, thumbs up, great stuff. Jason Bateman, clearly the man of the hour for Disney.
That's the thing. I think you hit the nail on the head, Gar. I can't add much to that because we agreed at the time, but I think a lot of Disney films rely on the songs, and this film doesn't have any songs. It has a bit of a bop at the end and throughout. All good Disney movies have great songs, but more importantly, have great stories. I think this is one of the best Disney stories ever told.
And it has something to say in a way that, some of the, as we talked about Raya last week, again, for continuity's sake, I'm saying last weekend, you see, podcast, it's coming together even though we're recording back to back. That tried to have something to say and failed, and Ralph Breaks the Internet just didn't even come close to having something to say about the internet, as opposed to Zootopia, which really did have interesting things to say and said it well. So yeah, great movie. So number 3 for me, Ken, Beauty and the Beast.
That's also on my list.
So we will move on to number 2.
Number 2 for me is The Lion King.
Oh, I thought that would be your number 1.
Yeah, I battled with that, but
it's also number 2 for me, by the way.
Yeah, again,
it feels so cliche to be The Lion King is great, but The Lion King is great.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like people go, oh yeah, of course, and in fairness, that's maybe why I resisted putting it at number 1. But there's everything there. Scar is an amazing villain,
top notch.
The animation is gorgeous,
lovely.
The songs are transcendent.
Yeah, still singing them today.
They've spawned a franchise that has, until Frozen, was unmatched in terms of permeating our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And
live action sequel you don't want to watch.
I talked about this at the time and I still can't articulate it quite as well as I'd like, but it
left that emotional impact on you.
Yeah.
Which it's nostalgia partially, but it's only nostalgia because it just left that emotional impact on you when you watch it in the 90s, that you will carry it with you forever. And no matter, it's a thing that you really can't view through an objective lens anymore, even though when you do, it's still this film is sensational, but it has that weight, that heft, that it's foundational to who you are as a piece of culture, and you can't beat that, can you?
Yeah, and I would even go as far to say as it shaped who I am as a person, because it has
You're a lion?
I'm always lying.
Ah,
You know what I'm saying? But, in terms of, it deals with things like loss, what it means to be a good leader, what it means to be a responsible person.
Mufasa doesn't come back to life.
Yes. He comes back to guide him, but that actually, for me, is one of the best scenes in the movie.
You see, that actually works, because it doesn't underdo the stake, because it's more reminding Simba of living up to his legacy and living up to who Mufasa was, and Mufasa was trying to teach him, than just bringing Mufasa back. Like a lesser film would be, and now Mufasa's alive to teach him again. And it's like, no, he's dead. And he's staying dead. And Simba has to step up and own his legacy and undo his own mistakes. It's a great movie. Yeah. Shakespearean, some would say.
I think I know what you have at number one, Gar, because you buried the lead in the podcast itself. Would I hazard a guess at Lilo and Stitch?
Yes, Lilo and Stitch is my best Disney animated movie. It's my favourite movie, I think, of all time. Like, in terms of those two characters, the story of Lilo and Stitch, again, dealing with grief, but from a completely different lens. And there's so much that film doesn't say that makes, like, reading into the subtext, like, you don't learn much about it's like when, I mentioned to you, it's like, where did Lilo get her love of Elvis from? And then you realise, that's an emotional connection back to her parents. And when she's trying to make Stitch into Elvis, she's trying to like recreate a parent figure in her life through Stitch, and like there's that depth in this movie, and the movie is so funny, and Lilo is so dark and grim
and weird
in a way that's so great. It's like she shoves her head under a pillow and is like, I want to die at one stage, which is a line that probably wouldn't make it into the Disney film these days. Clearly that's probably the plus point of this film coming out during one of the creative down points, where they're probably less like, we have to focus test that out. It's like, we're failing, we might as well leave it in.
Let's try. Let's see what happens.
Every time I watch this film, it just makes me feel good.
Yeah, I think we said it at the time. I remember when it finished, I was like, hook it to my veins. It just gives me a good feeling, because it goes through that roller coaster of emotions, for want of a better term, because you develop such an affinity for them that at the end of the day, you know that they're still not perfect. There's a lot of healing to do, but you feel like that they're in a place to do it, and there's a bop of a song at the end. So it's just...
Elvis songs, you can't go wrong.
You mentioned at the time, like, you could have viewed putting Elvis in this movie as a cynical move, even though Elvis obviously does have connections to Hawaii, as we know. But it's done in such a smart way that it makes sense. It's not just done for the sake of doing it. It makes sense.
It enhances the story, it enhances the characters, and of course, it's Elvis songs. It enhances the soundtrack. It makes sense. And like, for a film that's so high concept about this alien, the space species...
experiment...
is crashing down to Earth and having the galactic space council chase after him. It tells such grounded stories about Stitch trying to find home, Stitch dealing with like nature versus nurture, which is surprisingly deep for a Disney film, and then Lilo dealing with grief and trying to find family, and Nani trying to hold family together in a role that she is neither equipped nor suited for, particularly trying to be like basically the mother of the family when she just wants to be Lilo's sister, and that's very difficult to deal with. It has all these deep themes, and then you just get Stitch, who's just like the cute animal sidekick, but really, really good and really, really deep, and feeling much less cynical.
And I think the thing for me is that they didn't tie it up in a neat little bow in the end. Like, on the surface, like, yeah, they're rebuilding the house, everyone's happy, they're a happy little family, a chosen family, as it were. But we do get the sense that they still have work to do. Yeah. Instead of like, everything's okay now. They left us sit with those themes.
It makes me feel good. That's all you want out of entertainment. It's something that just makes you feel good. And you'll cry a little in the middle, and then it'll resolve, and you'll be happy.
And you'll be popping along to Burning Love.
Yeah. Hawaiian Roller Coaster as well, by the way. Again, like, you don't think of Lilo and Stitch as a film for its original songs, but Hawaiian Roller Coaster, also a bop.
Number one for me, Gar, probably not a surprise at this point, Beauty and the Beast.
Which was my 3.
I think if you're going to say what is Disney at its best, I think you have to say, even with The Lion King, and as great as it is, it's Beauty and the Beast. It's the first animated movie ever to be nominated for Best Picture for a reason. If you look at the animation, it's just flawless. The storytelling, while following the Disney princess tropes, is well done. It feels earned. It makes sense. The songs are timeless and iconic, and it has a sense of atmosphere and place that I think few Disney films do.
I think we said at the time, why doesn't Disney make animated films for adults? Instead of just making animated films for children, this is the closest they've come to making, not that there's nothing here for kids, because it still has the colors and the sounds and the music and some of the characters and all the obviously candlesticks coming to life and clocks coming to life and all that stuff that does appeal to children. But like at its core, this is like a gothic romance story, which is very cool to see a studio at the scale of Disney make. And it's very clear why, as you said, it was nominated for Best Picture, which is, is it the only Disney film?
No, it was followed by Up and Toy Story 3.
No, those are Pixar films.
Yes, the only Disney film to date.
So it's the only one of these Disney animated features to be nominated for Best Picture, which says a lot. Like, this film is mature and it's exceptionally pretty. Again, going back to like the pinnacles of 2D animation, like there's this and The Lion King, and there's Sleeping Beauty, and there's Bambi, all exceptionally lovely films to look at. Just the architecture of the castles and all that, and the French castles and the French towns, so good to look at. Great songs, even the underrated songs, like Belle is just a great, like those character introduction songs where it's like, oh, it's a little ensemble piece where everyone says who they are. That's probably the best one.
It's also got a very strong villain, and you might say to face with Gaston. Gaston is the leader. Mm-hmm. The villain is the village itself.
Yes.
So he's like the face of it because he represents everything.
He's the face of the faceless mob.
Yeah, everything that's bad about that kind of thinking, like fear, ignorance, selfishness, greed. They are the villain in this movie, and like it leads to that really exciting and thrilling and dramatic climax as well. I did cry at the end when I thought the beast was dead, yes. Even though we all know he wasn't going to die. And that's a really nicely done sequence where he turns back into a human. The score crescendos, then it's like all that stuff. It's I can't do it justice because I'm terrible at singing, but it's just I think it's damn near a perfect film.
Yeah, it's exceptional. As I said, it's my third best. So like you can't do much better than that. And it's probably the most important film they've made.
For sure.
As like in terms of like prestige entertainment. And it does stand quite high. So for recap purposes, my top 10 from 1 to 10. Lilo and Stitch, The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Zootopia. 5 is Winnie the Pooh. 6, Big Hero 6. 7, Aladdin. 8, Bambi. 9, Sleeping Beauty. And 10. I didn't expect Great Mass Detective to make your list. Especially like Hercules. You love Hercules.
I love Hercules, I do, but I was trying to be objective with this because like if I gave my favorite, that list would be very, very different. But like because the premise of the podcast was to dive into why these films are successful and why they're not, and which ones are good and which ones are not, and why, I think I wanted to make it more of a list of objectively rather than going with my gut and my feelings.
So your top 10 quick, Ken.
Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Zootopia / Zootropolis, Lilo and Stitch, Bambi at number 5, Sleeping Beauty at number 6, Mulan at number 7, Tarzan at number 8, Tangled at number 9, and The Great Mouse Detective at number 10. If it's one thing I want people to take away from that list, this and Zootopia are underrated films. You really need to get on those.
Yeah, those are the ones that don't get enough love and deserve a lot more.
All right, Disney disciples, that's it for our exploration of Disney animated films for now. Going forward, we will review new films in the canon as they are released between phases. New episodes of Magic by Design land every Monday, where all magical podcasts are downloaded. Stop by the website at magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com to find a full list of podcast platforms. We are literally everywhere: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, you name it, we're on it. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Do you agree with our lists, or do you have a bone to pick? Send us your own lists on the socials, on Facebook at facebook.com/magicbydesignpod, on Twitter at Magic Design Pod, and on Instagram at Magic by Design Pod. Next week, we start phase 2 of our Disney journey of discovery with a review of Pixar's first animated feature, Toy Story, so be sure to join us for that. But until then, stay safe and remember, around here, we don't go backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. That's a quote from Walt Disney himself.
He was talking about this podcast as well.
Yes, he was. He knew this was coming.
Yes. He was like, someday, long after I'm dead, some brothers will sit in their bedroom during a pandemic and talk about my movies, and this is what I have to say about them.
And I think his only regret was that he wasn't alive to see it.
Yeah, but he knows we're his legacy, not Mickey Mouse.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.